Welcome to the Flame Tree Myth and Fiction podcast.
Today we're entering otherworldly dimensions where the rules of time no longer apply. Spaces where characters can escape the consequences of reality. Are you ready to get lost with them? Our first story is from Dreams Divine, the latest book in our romantic fantasy series. This story has a dark side though. Sometimes the best love stories are the ones that don't end in happily ever after. An irresistible bait is offered up, something sweet to hide the burn of a fate unimaginably sour. I'll let the brilliant author Bella Chacha introduce her story now.
Hello listeners, my name is Bella Chacha and I'm the author of The Last Night Market, featured in Dreams Divine. My story, The Last Night Market, follows a story of a young woman named Adiola, who was drawn in a mysterious floating market that appears beneath an eclipsed moon, where memories and future can be traded at a cost. At its heart of my story is about desire, memory, and the emotional cost of wanting sanctity or happiness so badly that she, Adiola, begins to lose part of herself in pursuit of it. She was especially interested in exploring how love and longing can blur the line between escape and surrender. I, Bella Chacha, is a Nigerian speculative fiction writer, and many of my stories are drawn to themes of identity, loss, marriage, and emotional transformation. With The Last Night Market, I wanted to create something dreamlike and haunting, but also deeply human. Thank you so much for listening to my intro, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the story.
Right, so I'm sure you're all ready to hear The Last Night Market by Bella Chacha, narrated by Rathi Durang for the podcast.
The Last Night Market by Bella Chacha. The curtains were trembling again. Adiola lay still, her cheek pressed against the warm hollow of her pillow, listening for the sound of wind. There was none. No rustle of leaves outside, no rattle from the rusted balcony rail. The night air was thick, holding its breath. Yet the curtains swayed, as though someone stood just beyond them, exhaling softly into the fabric. She rose. The floorboards gave their usual reluctant sigh under her bare feet. She parted the curtains with a small flick of her wrist, prepared to find nothing. And then she saw it. The moon hung low over the city, swollen and silver, but with a perfect crescent missing from its side, a bite, clean and sharp-edged, as if some cosmic mouth had claimed it mid-meal. Her breath caught. She had seen that moon before, once, 14 years ago, when she was just a girl in a borrowed nightdress too long for her legs. That night the moon had looked exactly like this, not a shadow's eclipse, but a devouring. That night was the first time she had dreamed of the market, and the last. Until now. The memory rose in her like a tide, lanterns adrift in the dark, the scent of river mud and oranges, a voice speaking her name in a tongue both strange and achingly familiar. She pressed her fingers to the cold glass. The bite-marked moon seemed to pulse, a slow beat, like the thud of a drum deep underwater. For a moment, she thought she heard it. The hum of wooden planks beneath her feet, the creak of mooring ropes strained against unseen currents. She backed away, heart hammering, and returned to bed, as if the blankets might anchor her in the waking world. But even as she lay down, even as she told herself, I am still here, her vision blurred at the edges, and the ceiling dissolved into a vast black sky. No door, no drifting into dream, just the sudden tilt of a wooden platform swaying beneath her, the slap of dark water below, and light, 1,000 lanterns strung not on ropes, but floating, untethered in the air, each glowing with its own colour, rose, saffron, the green of leaves seen through rain. Their reflections quivered in the water, making the world double itself in beauty and threat. Adiola knew where she was. Her breath came fast, sharp with wonder and dread. The market had returned. Voices curled around her, speaking in languages she half understood, bartering for things that made her skin prickle. A bundle of shadows tied with twine, a glass jar of laughter that fizzed against its lid, a length of cloth woven from light. She moved between the stalls, dizzy from the scents. Cinnamon smoke, rain on iron, the faint sweetness of fruit she could not name. Every step made the platform shudder, the tide lifting and lowering her like the palm of a breathing giant. And then she saw him, the tomorrow merchant. He stood behind a narrow table lined with objects that seemed impossible. A coin that changed its face when she blinked, a folded note that whispered her name, a compass with no needle. But she only truly saw him. A young man, no older than herself, with eyes the colour of ink poured into water, spreading and swallowing light. His clothes were simple, but his smile, that knowing, waiting smile, was heavy with recognition. As if you've been gone a long time, he said, though she hadn't spoken. As if you've been expecting me, she whispered. The words tasting strange on her tongue. The lantern swayed above them, their colours shifting. Somewhere far off, a bell tolled once, and the market seemed to lean in, listening. Wonder swelled in her chest, threaded through with something sharper, a foreboding she couldn't name, because she knew, without knowing how, that every step she took here would cost her something in the world she had left behind. And she wasn't sure she would ever want to go back. The merchant's stall was smaller than she remembered. A single wooden counter balanced on ropes that dipped and rose with the swell of the black water beneath. On it lay rows of glass vials, each no larger than a child's thumb, their contents glowing faintly, golds like trapped sunlight, silvers like frozen breath, and colours she had no name for. "This is what I sell," he said, his voice warm as midnight. "Memories of tomorrow." Adiola blinked. Memories can only belong to the past. He shook his head, the lamplight spilling ink shadows across his face. "Not here. Not in the night market. You can drink one, and when the day comes, it will be exactly as you've tasted. Every joy, every sorrow, every drop of rain against your skin, but..." His smile thinned into something dangerous. "Nothing is free here." She glanced at the labels. Tomorrow's laughter, a storm at sea, the moment before a kiss, regret by candlelight. "What do you take in return?" she asked. "Something from your waking life," he said. "A memory, a possession, a truth you have lived. The greater the tomorrow, the dearer the price." Her gaze lingered on a vial glowing a soft, impossible yellow. Its label read, "Tomorrow's Laughter." She thought of the dull rhythm of her days, the heaviness that had been settling in her bones. To laugh until she couldn't breathe. She would pay for that. What will it cost? He studied her as though she were a puzzle carved into the tide. The sound of your mother's voice singing your name. Adiola hesitated. The voice she had known since birth, warm and lilting, weaving her name into lullabies and morning calls, To give it away would be to lose a part of herself. Yet her hands reached for the vial before she could stop them. "Done," she whispered. The moment the vial touched her palm, the memory unravelled. The thread of her mother's song slipped from her mind, leaving only an empty frame. She remembered that her mother had sung to her, yes, but not the sound, not the rise and fall, not the way it curled around her name like a promise. She drank. The liquid was cold and sharp, like the first bite of fruit, and then warm, fizzing at the edges of her mind. When she woke the next morning, the world seemed clearer, the air lighter, and when a colleague at work told a clumsy, ridiculous joke about the moon, she laughed, really laughed, until tears blurred her vision and her ribs ached, and in that dizzy moment she thought of the vial. That night, when she closed her eyes, the tide rose beneath her feet again, and the lanterns drifted in the air without strings. The merchant was waiting. His ink-dark eyes glinted. "You've come back," he said. She didn't answer. She had already known she would return. The merchant told her the market did not belong to clocks. "It comes," he said, "only when the moon swallows its own light." Sometimes that meant years between eclipses, sometimes only months. Time was as fickle here as the tide, and the tide only obeyed desire. She began to measure her life by these rare nights. Between them, the world felt faded. Even when she walked through the crush of the morning bus, or sat beneath the hiss of her shower, or spoke mid-conversation with a friend, her mind slid back to him, to the slow, deliberate way he corked a vial, to the weight of his gaze like a tide pulling her under. When the market returned, it was always without warning. A dream that began mid-step, lanterns floating above a dark canal, the scent of rain and ripe fruit in the air. Her trades grew bolder. One night, she surrendered the memory of her first kiss, clumsy, in the back of a half-lit classroom, the taste of stolen guava beneath their teeth, in exchange for tomorrow's rain. The next day, clouds rolled at exactly 4 o'clock, and she stood in the middle of the street, letting the downpour soak her hair, her clothes, her bones. It was not ordinary rain. It felt orchestrated, a note-perfect performance of water. Another night she gave up her favourite book, the one she had read so often she could recite its first chapter from memory. The merchant took it without touching her. Simply the words vanished from her mind, and placed in her palm a vial labelled Tomorrow's Song. The next day, walking past a street musician, she heard a melody she'd never known but somehow remembered. It twined around her heart until she wept. And then there was her grandmother's face. She had hesitated longer over that one. Her grandmother had been the keeper of family stories, her laughter the anchor of Adiola's childhood. But tomorrow's embrace sat on the counter like a promise too sweet to resist. She drank it, and the next morning woke in the arms of someone she loved but could not name, wrapped in a warmth that made her ache with longing. Each waking day began to feel curated. The right song at the right corner, the exact words she wished someone would say falling into her ears. The world was no longer a series of accidents. It was a stage set, lit for her alone. But the stage had its shadows. Friends began to glance at her strangely. "You forgot my birthday," one said, hurt thick in their voice. Another laughed awkwardly when she failed to recall the punchline of a joke they told just last week. Faces at work blurred at the edges, conversations unravelled halfway through. She started writing notes to herself, reminders, fragments of who she'd been, but the slips of paper lay unread in the pockets of coats she no longer remembered owning. And yet, each time the moon hid its face, she returned. Because in the floating market he remembered her, every detail. the tilt of her head, the cadence of her breath. He asked her about her days as though they were treasures he had kept safe, and when his hand brushed hers as he passed a vial across the counter, the sensation followed her into waking, like the faint taste of something she had once loved. Love and magic had a weight, she thought. She just didn't know yet how much of herself she could carry before the tide took the rest. The market returned on a night when the air in her room felt heavier than the dark. She found herself again before his stall, its shelves lined with glass vials that glimmered like trapped stars. This time she did not browse. "I want tomorrow's goodbye," she said. The words startled even her. They sounded like betrayal, though her heart beat in defense of them. She wanted to know the shape of loss before it arrived. She wanted to taste the end so she could brace for it. The merchant's hand stilled over a row of bottles. His eyes, usually so steady, wavered. "Goodbyes," he said slowly, "belong to the waking." "Well, that's just another way of saying you won't sell it." "I can't sell it." His voice had an edge she had never heard before. Not refusal, but something more raw. When he turned to face her fully, there was something unguarded in his gaze, a flicker of fear? The thought unnerved her. Until now, she had imagined him as part of the market itself, untouchable, beyond the laws she lived by. "You're afraid," she said. He looked away. "You think you're the only one who trades here?" The silence between them deepened, pressing against her ribs. She stepped closer, close enough to see the fine lines at the corners of his mouth, close enough to feel the faint warmth radiating from him. "What did you trade?" she asked. He shook his head, but the answer lived in the hollowness of his expression. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. His skin was warm, but beneath it, beneath the pulse, there was an absence she could feel as clearly as bone. Not emptiness, but an outline where something used to be. A memory, gone. Her breath caught. "Do you even remember your own name?" The corner of his mouth lifted, though it wasn't a smile. "Names aren't worth much here. They fade fastest." The words chilled her, because suddenly she could imagine a market where even he would vanish, piece by piece, until nothing remained but the stall, the vials, the scent of rain in the air. And yet, she wanted him more fiercely than ever, even if it meant paying with the scraps of herself she had left. Somewhere deep inside her, a thought began to take root, sharp as glass. If he could give up pieces of himself to meet her, then there must be a price high enough to keep him. But she didn't yet know what it was. The sky was a deep black velvet stretched taut, pierced by two moons locked in an unyielding embrace. A double eclipse, the rarest of nights, an event so powerful, the floating market had never appeared for more than a single evening before. Now, it would linger for 3. Adiola felt the weight of the moment before she even stepped onto the creaking wooden platform that seemed to breathe beneath her feet. The air shimmered with lantern light, golden and soft, each glow whispering secrets in tongues she almost understood. The market swayed gently on dark waters that reflected the fractured moons above, a mirror to a world both strange and achingly familiar. In the waking world, Adiola was unrecognizable, even to herself. Her reflection was a stranger, hollow eyes framed by tired skin, lips parted as if to speak a name long lost. She could not remember the city she called home, nor the faces of those who had once laughed beside her. The comfort of her job, the rhythm of her days, all evaporated like mist in the dawn. Only one memory burned bright and clear. The merchant. He waited beneath the lantern-lit archway, his eyes deep pools of ink spilled into water, calm and infinite, his hand stretched toward her, unwavering. Adiola swallowed the lump in her throat. The choice had come, heavy as the eclipse's shadow, remain tethered to a fractured waking world that no longer felt like hers, or step beyond the veil and lose everything but this dream, this impossible love. "I want forever," she whispered, voice fragile but steady, trembling with the weight of everything she had sacrificed to arrive here. The merchant's face softened, but his eyes flickered with a quiet sorrow. "The price is more than you know," he said. "Once you drink, there is no turning back." Adiola met his gaze and reached into the folds of her spirit, pulling out the last piece she held tight, the memory of how to return to the waking world. She offered it with open hands. The merchant's finger closed gently around the fragile gift, the memory flickering like a dying candle flame before vanishing entirely. He handed her a vial shimmering with silver liquid. Tomorrow's forever. Heart pounding, Adiola lifted the glass to her lips. The liquid was cool, tasting like moonlight and jasmine, flowing like liquid time through her veins. A warmth blossomed from her chest, spreading through her limbs until she felt as if she were dissolving, weightless and unbound. Around her, the market transformed. The wooden planks beneath her feet became clouds, lanterns burst into constellations, and the music of invisible strings wove through the air, a melody older than memory, filled with longing and hope. She took the merchant's hand. His touch was a promise, a tether to this place where hunger, pain, and fear no longer held sway. Here she could live forever, in the dreamscape where love was constant, where the impossible bloomed beneath eternal moons. A single tear escaped, tracing a silver path down her cheek, shimmering in the golden light. Adiola closed her eyes and let herself fall deeper, knowing, feeling, that she would never wake. Because some loves are not bound by life, but by the surrender of all that once was. The market swayed gently, the double moons casting long shadows, and somewhere between the lanterns and the stars, the whisper of a trade completed echoed, a love forever sealed, a price forever paid. Adiola drifted through the market, endlessly weaving between stalls that shimmered like distant stars. Her feet made no sound on the wooden planks, worn smooth by centuries of whispered trades and silent bargains. Time had no claim here. The weight of years, the ache of hunger, the sharp edges of loss, all were softened into a gentle haze, a golden glow that wrapped around her like a second skin. She smiled, touched a lantern glowing with a fragile light, and moved on. The market song played softly, a melody she could no longer name but knew in the marrow of her bones. The stalls offered wonders, bottles of forgotten dreams, shards of laughter long past, and fragrances that teased memories she could no longer reach. She passed one selling yesterday's laughter, its glass catching the moonlight, casting rainbows on her skin. The merchant stood nearby, watching the crowd with quiet eyes. When Adiola's gaze met his, he looked away, as if the weight of her name was a debt he could not pay. Did he remember? Or had he traded her identity away to hold her forever in this dream? Adiola did not wonder. The question no longer mattered. In the waking world, her apartment was silent and still. The door stood ajar, swinging slightly in a breeze that did not come. Inside, the bed was made with careless neatness, the pillow plumped as if waiting for someone who would never return. A mug sat on the table, steam curling in the pale morning light, forgotten warmth in a cold room. Friends had called again and again, police searched, rumors spread. No leads, no answers. Adiola was a ghost who had slipped through the cracks of time, swallowed by the market that only appeared under eclipsed moons. Her life was a story half told, a song cut short. Back in the dreamscape, Adiola's footsteps echoed softly, a whisper beneath the eternal moonlight. She moved through a world suspended between sorrow and joy, a place where the ache of perfect love came with the price of everything she once was. The market continued, timeless and merciless, and somewhere between the stalls, the merchant kept watch, keeper of memories, trader of tomorrows, and, perhaps, the last guardian of a love that could never truly be free. The silent question hung in the air, fragile as breath. What becomes of a soul traded for forever? The ache of beauty lost, the hollow echo of choices made. Adiola's fate is a tender wound that refuses to heal, a reminder that the deepest love may demand the severing of the self. The story closes with a haunting ambiguity. Love eternal, but at what cost?
Would you trade yesterday for tomorrow? Sometimes it's easy to take what we have for granted, but the glistening promise of a better future is one that very few can pass up. What would you have done in Adiola's position? I also think that Bella Chacha addresses some of the more troubling aspects of the romantasy genre in this story. Very often, the heroes or heroines make large sacrifices in the name of love, which the reader takes to be the ultimate gesture. In reality, you shouldn't ever have to give up so much of yourself for somebody else. It's all a little bit toxic. For our next story, we're leaving love at the wayside and driving into another escapist realm. This one was written by Edgar Allan Poe and is titled The Mask of the Red Death. Expect luxury, corruption, and the inescapable clutches of death. We've got Richard McIver back on the podcast to read you this one.
The Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar, and its seal, the redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy, and dauntless, and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to the sudden impulses of despair or of frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at each turn a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vivid blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. Panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now, in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum. Amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof, there was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers. But in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood, opposite to each window, a heavy tripod, bearing a brazier of fire that projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illumined the room. And thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered, that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. It was in this apartment, also, that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that, at each lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause, momentarily, in their performance, to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company. And, while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows, each to the other, that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then were the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before. But, in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He had directed, in great part, the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers, upon occasion of this great feat, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of what has been since seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies such as the madman fashions. There were much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams. And these, the dreams, writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And, anon, there strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of the velvet, and then, for a moment, all is still, and all is silent save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many tinted windows through which streams the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the seven, there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls, and to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal, more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life. And the revel went whirlingly on, until at length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps that more of thought crept, with more of time, into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who revelled, and thus too it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz of murmur expressive of disapprobation and surprise. Then, finally, of terror, of horror, and of disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. Even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests, there are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revellers around. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon the spectral image, which with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed, in the first moment with a strong shudder either of terror or distaste, but, in the next, his brow reddened with rage.
"Who dares?"
he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him. "Who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements." It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who, at the moment, was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and, while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which, instantly afterwards, fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and, seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask which they handled with so violent a rudeness untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of the revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all.
In a way, I feel as though this is a bit of a morality tale, one that perhaps should have made the rounds during the devastation of the coronavirus. This story points out that death is the great equalizer. It comes for us all, regardless of privilege or wealth. Poe gets the symbolism spot on. The clock, the colours, the mask, everything is deliberately placed to paint a layered and complex story. It is deeply ironic that Prospero manufactures his own trap. The looming presence of the Red Death reminds me slightly of the stories in our earlier episode this season, The Shape of Death, so perhaps give that a listen if you enjoyed this Poe story. I hope you guys enjoyed escaping into these stories. Join us next week for a very exciting monthly special. We're going to be talking to our writer-in-residence, Shilpa Varma, about her mini-series Blood and the Battlements, which uncovers India's most haunted forts and towns. See you next week!
Thanks so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Flame Tree Myth and Fiction podcast and look forward to the next episode. Do recommend it to your friends. Goodbye for now.